Heidi ho everybody, Rich here. Today we're going to make one of these busy boards. These are great for toddlers, lots of motion activities, things for them to do, lots of fun to build too. I built this one. Stick around, I'll show you how I did it. So for my busy board, I'm going to use this old turntable. So this was a Lazy Susan style thing we had on our kitchen table, and it was a little big and it was always a little awkward, so we found we never really used it. It had just been sitting to the side. I've sanded the initial design off of it and restained it. This will make a great busy board. The thing I like about this, because it's round, there's no sharp edges for baby to get hurt on. I'm gonna put some feet on the back of it, so you'll be able to place it on the floor, you'll be able to place it on the table and play with it. You'll also be able to mount it to the wall if you choose to. I think this is a really great design. Now you can get these pre-made at the big box stores like Lowe's or Home Depot. The 18-inch to 24-inch ones, you can get sub 20 bucks. When I checked this morning, Home Depot had the 24-inch version of this for about $18. Now this is the 18-inch version, but I think this will be great for my needs. Okay, for all the stuff you're gonna put on it, if you're like me, you probably have a box of old just parts sitting around. I mean, I actually call this my odds and end box. So I'm gonna start by digging through this box and see what cool stuff I have that I can use on the board. We'll go from there. So here's something that's kind of interesting. An old toilet paper roll holder. Bet I can put some spinnies or something on that. That'll be fun to use. Got an old door handle assembly. Can probably use that. Got a fan switch. Got that nice click mechanism on it. It's an old door hinge. That should be fun. Caster wheel. So let me keep digging through this box. I'm gonna pull out some items I think that'll be useful for this. I'll lay them out on the board and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, my wife also had this bag of craft beads down in her craft supply. These are definitely gonna incorporate it in the board. These will be very cool. I'm gonna make this toilet paper holder piece the center of my board. Now, instead of using the toilet paper ring, I'm actually gonna put a bolt through there, and I went ahead and drilled holes in the end of that to accommodate that bolt. And I'm gonna put these 3 different size beads on there. So I've got 2 medium size and 1 large. I'm gonna put them on a design like that, and then they'll just be spinners in the middle of that bracket. And I'm gonna put that right in the center of my board. All right, so that's what that looks like. So what I did I flipped the brackets where they're both facing the same way. So I was able to bury the head of the bolt in this end, and then on this end, I'll just use an acorn nut. That way there's no sharp edges, no bolt for baby to get a hold of. Mount that on there, be able to spin those balls. That's gonna go right in the middle of the board. So I found this piece of dowel rod, and I've got these balls like I mentioned. So I'm gonna glue that together, make like a little dumbbell here. And then I've got these brackets that I had from another project. I'm gonna mount these to the board so that little dumbbell can clip in there and hang on there. And you'll be able to take that off and play with that individually. Now those balls are pretty lightweight, and that's dowel rod, so that's very light, not too dangerous. I think that'll be really cool. So one thing that I know all little kids love to play with are these door stops, these spring-loaded ones. So I'm gonna mount one of them on the board too. Also have one of these cheap dollar store fidget spinners. This one's actually got decent bearings, but it was cheap. So we'll glue that or mount that right on there. You'll be able to spin that. That'll be very cool on the board too. So I already mentioned the door handle. Here's the rest of the assembly. Now this one's kind of cool because this is the spring-loaded end. So when you put that on there, it'll actually twist and rebound on you. Now the one challenge I am gonna have is that does stick up. So I'm gonna have to mortise out a hole or whatever for that and probably trim those off. But I still think this will be cool once it's all popped together. It's also got the lock in there. You'll be able to pop the lock, twist the handle. This should be really fun. All right, so I showed this earlier, this little mini caster. So I'll put that on there. That'll be a fun spinner. That'll go on there. I've also got the hinge that I'm gonna use. It's an old door hinge. So I was playing with this a little bit, and you can see that that's not in alignment. I did that on purpose. So I'll mount the one side flat, but that way, when this one's opened, it won't close all the way, so no little fingers can get smashed. Now this I didn't have, but I did pick this up locally. So this is one of those chain locks that would go on a door where you can take that out, hook that up and slide it. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. We'll mount that at the top of the board. That'll be some good interactivity. Again, be able to connect, disconnect that. So I'm pretty excited about that too. I found this old cabinet knob in my box. Now I didn't really have anything to do with it, but I was able to pick up a couple of these metal rings pretty cheap. So I'm gonna mount these rings over that handle, and then that'll be on the board. You'll be able to slide those back and forth, but since the handle will be mounted down, they won't be able to come off. So I mentioned these beads that I have. So what I have here is some paracord. So what I think I'm gonna do is get a couple of these barrel style ones, and I'll mount those down to the board, and then I'll have the paracord come up have a few beads on the string, be able to slide those back and forth. All right, so I showed the fan controller when I took it out of the box. I actually disassembled it, took most of the guts out of it. I was able to keep the mechanism that makes that clicking noise, so that'll be very cool. I'm just gonna have to glue that back together when I put it together, so there's no way it comes apart. So this is what my general mock-up looks like. You'll have the, my daughter calls this the ding-a-ling. You'll have the ding-a-ling there, fidget spinner. This will be able to pop in and out of those brackets. The hinge will fold. Like I said, it won't close all the way, so no smashing the little fingers. Got our little wheelie bird here, our spinnies here, doorknob clicker. Our rings are gonna be on this. We'll have our chain up here, and then I'm gonna do something creative with these beads. So I'm gonna go ahead and mount that down there. I'm gonna start by just putting a couple of marks for this first bracket. We'll get this first bracket in place, and then we'll put the whole assembly in. Now I am gonna drill some small pilot holes to keep the wood from splitting as I run the screws in. Now I have some number 10 flat head screws. These are 1-inch screws. This material is almost exactly 1 inch, so with the gap that eats up, that should bite almost all the way through, but not come out the back side of the board, so that's very important. Okay, we want to get those nice and tight, but not too tight. This is a soft wood and it will tear out if you're not careful. We're going to go ahead and set the next piece. To do that, we're going to set up our beads and everything on our bolt. Now, as I said earlier, I'm having these face the same direction so I can hide the bolt, the head of the bolt at this end, and then I'll just cap it with this acorn nut at the other. I think that'll work out really good. So I added thread locker to the threads of the bolt as well as the threads of the nut. So we're just going to go ahead and hand tighten that. Once the thread locker dries, that should hold that in place. But we've got just enough to allow these beads to turn with a little bit of resistance. It's just about perfect. That's exactly what we were looking for. I'm gonna go ahead and mount the doorknob next. Now I've got these prongs that stick down. I'm gonna have to get those out of the way, so I'm just gonna unceremoniously take some channel locks and just break them off. Okay, the next step I'm gonna do is I am gonna have to drill this out a little bit. I've got these Forstner bits, so I'll take a Forstner bit that's the diameter of that. I'm gonna have to go up a little bit in size here, and I'll drill that out where I can recess that just a little bit, and then I'll be able to put some screws in there to get that flush right on the surface. And I'm only gonna go down maybe about 1/4 of an inch and see how that works out for me. Oh, that's about perfect. So let me go ahead and get this mess cleaned up, and then we'll go ahead and start mounting that. So now we'll put her together. This is spring loaded, so that turns back whenever you let go of it. Gives nice feedback, nice interaction. Really good. Okay, so I've got that installed. I ended up having to loosen up the plate just a little bit to get that to spin on, and then I bent that over and took a small screwdriver, got in there and tightened it up by hand. But it's nice and tight now, doesn't seem to want to spin off, and that's the exact effect I'm going for. So the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is mount my hinge. Now I'm going to go ahead and pop that pin all the way in. There's a little retainer in there, so once that pin's popped in, it's much harder to get back out. So I went ahead and placed my hinge. I've got my holes marked. I'm going to drill some pilots, and then I'm going to go ahead and set my screws in. So we'll put our little caster on here next. So I'll just go ahead and mark the holes. Dimmer switch with the clicker. I just drilled a couple holes in the back of the plastic mount. So I'm going to go ahead and mount it to the board straight through there, and then when I pop it together, I'll glue it to make sure it can't come back apart. So I'm not going to glue it right now. I'm just going to set that in there so you can see. We'll have that little clicker switch. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to mount our handle here. Now the trick with this will be to make sure we remember to keep those rings on there before we mount it. Now the hole points on here are exactly 3 inches apart, so I'm going to drill a hole, I'm going to measure over 3 inches, and then I'm going to drill another hole. Okay, so I'm going to have to countersink these a little bit. The screws aren't quite long enough, so I'm going to take a larger drill bit and I'm going to countersink that by about 1/4 of an inch. We'll allow the head to recess, and then it'll be long enough to hook into that bracket on the other side. Okay, so I was able to get that mounted. I put those 2 rings on there, so now those rings are captured. It'll be a nice little play toy as well. Okay, so I mounted my two little brackets here for my dumbbell. So I've got that together. I do still need to glue that, but basically that'll just snap right in there. Can be popped out pretty easily. Snap right back in. Hey, are you liking this video? Why don't you give me a thumbs up? Think about subscribing to the channel. So the next thing I want to mount is my chain latch here. So I'm going to spin the board and get that mounted just like that. Okay, now we've got this on there. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do is countersink these barrel nuts, and then I'm going to string a rope of beads across here, and I'm going to take it through the back and tie it off in the back. But to do that, I'm going to use a spade bit here, and I'm going to dig into this just a little bit so I can drop that front edge down in there. So what I did for my bead run over here that I want to do is I ended up going with a slightly smaller spade bit, and then I just sanded those down so they fit in there. I'll glue those. I'll give them one good whack with the rubber mallet. Should be good to go. So I went ahead and drilled a hole in the fidget spinner. It seemed to work okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mount that with a screw right there. All in all, I'd say that was pretty good. So the one part that I did do off camera, because it was really hard to do in film, was I got my barrel set here and I feeded some beads on the string, and I did 2 pieces of string to create a little resistance there. I'm not going to pull on that too much because I've got that glued, and then on the back side I just tied knots. The other thing I mentioned but I didn't show on camera is that I put these rubber feet on here. I put 5, so kind of the 4 corners in the middle. Those feet are rubber, so they do create non-skid, so you set that on a table. It's pretty sturdy, so as the child's playing with it, it's not going to move around a lot. I also went ahead off camera and I glued this together, and I glued the switch in place. At this point I need to wait a little while for the glue to dry, but basically we're all done. Hey, to all my brothers and sisters serving in harm's way around the world, you're always in my thoughts. Be safe out there. Till next time, everybody.